Candidates, we're out of questions. It is now time for your closing statements, and we begin with Mr. Côté.
Montreal is at a critical time now. We need, as a mayor, somebody who can make the tough decision. We need, as a mayor, somebody who will have the right priorities. We need, as a mayor, somebody who will not pursue pie in the skies because we won't get pie in the sky.
Okay. Mr. Coderre.
Thank you. On November 4th, Équipe Denis Coderre will roll up our sleeves and get to work. Équipe Denis Coderre has the results-driven team of trusty City Hall veterans along with 68 newcomers to tackle the issues. We are a team that will listen and that has your interests at heart.
For those of you looking for something better than 4 more years of business as usual, I offer this, an ambitious and optimistic vision for our city. To make it great again, with better public transportation, with more families choosing to remain on the island, and with human-scale improvements, street corner to street corner, borough to borough, across the city.
Okay, thank you. Madame Joly, you get the last word.
On November 3rd, you get to set Montreal on a new path, a new course. On November 3rd, you can vote for real change. I entered this race because I believe that Montreal and Montrealers deserve the chance to build a dynamic, prosperous, and caring city, one that is based on sound principles of ethical governance.
Thank you very much, candidates.
Welcome back to an evening with Montreal's next mayor here at Oscar Peterson Hall, the Loyola campus of Concordia University. I'm Aaron Rand, along with Jean Lapierre, Peggy Curran of the Montreal Gazette, and Linda Gyulai as well. Time to analyze what we've heard tonight. So let's begin with the obvious question, because it's the one everybody always asks. Did any of you consider there was a knockout for anyone in this debate this evening? Jean, let's begin with you.
Not at all. I think they were all too prudent, frankly. I didn't see a game changer here tonight. Everybody stick to their text. Nobody attacked the front runner, and in a way, everybody probably pleased their own clientele, but I didn't see a game changer here tonight.
Peggy?
I thought that Ms. Joly was less good than I had anticipated she would be. I think that she was weak. But like Jean, I find it odd that they were going after Mr. Côté when Mr. Côté is at the bottom in the polls. It was an interesting thing to me.
That's really the big surprise, isn't it? Before this began, the thinking across the board was they're all going to attack Denis Coderre. He's the leader. It's his chance to step up and fall down, as it were. Yet no one asked him a single question. Linda?
Maybe it's the venue. I mean, we're in the west end of the city, and Mr. Côté did mention Russell Copeman being his candidate for borough mayor here, and maybe there was a strategic decision made. I agree, though, it was a bit odd. Maybe they don't feel that Mr. Coderre could be attacked.
Well,
you better find a reason to attack him. He's the front runner as far as the last poll is concerned.
And we're here 10 days before the vote. Either you take risks tonight, or this week, or you're done. And I mean, I thought that was deep. I thought this could have been a turning point for anybody's campaign. I didn't see it.
Bergeron did go after Mr. Coderre right off the top by saying, you know, nobody should ever vote for anybody from Union Montreal. But other than that, it didn't happen.
But let's talk about that. I think that's an interesting point. You have Richard Bergeron, who through this campaign has always kind of alluded to the fact that Denis Coderre has members of Union Montreal in his party, basically alluding to the fact that, well, you know, if they're in Union Montreal, let's paint everybody with the same brush. They're all guilty. They're all corrupt because they were part of Union Montreal. Is that fair?
I thought the most interesting part was that it was Mr. Coderre who brought up his greatest weakness, not the other candidates. He's the one who said, yes, I've got a number of candidates from Union Montreal, so some of the old guard, but 70% are nevertheless not from Union. I think it's fair to the extent that I think Mr. Bergeron said it, that there are people who close their eyes.
But on the other hand, we all know that most of the Union Montreal candidates were approached by some other candidates, not only by Mr. Coderre, and I guess that's you know, everybody could say whatever they want, but if they could have had some of those candidates that were popular, and I think we should never accept guilt by association. I mean, we're seeing that every day at the Charbonneau Commission. Frankly, I don't think it's fair. And in a way, some people have served the city very well. I mean, it's all nice to say we need new blood, but you know, all new blood doesn't mean necessarily competence. And I mean, some people that have had experience, the best thing is to have a good mix, whether they're older or younger. I mean, when they talk about this generation won't take that, well, every generation pays taxes, and every generation should have also some, you know, their services. And so this is not about generation. The only thing that I saw tonight, though, those 4 people should be able to serve the city of Montreal in one role or another, because their commitment was evident tonight, and they all have different strengths, frankly.
Well, it was kind of interesting when Mr. Bergeron kept saying that Mr. Côté could be his administrative person. It was kind of a diss, because it was like saying, I'll be the mayor and you'll be my helper. But it was a sign that they all have respect for his skills and what he's bringing to the table.
You know, it's funny you say that. I said the same thing about Denis Coderre. It seems this whole idea of this independent council, the independent inspector general is going to be. I said, well, if you become mayor, you could have Monsieur Côté become your inspector general. He's the one who has the most knowledge of finance, of business, and I thought that's what this city was basically talking about. Let's put someone in City Hall who can run a business, because the city, at the end of the day, is a business. And it seems they both agree with him.
But I disagree with that, actually. I don't actually think the City of Montreal or any government is like Bell Canada. It's not the same thing. When you work for a corporation and you screw up, you get fired. No one gets fired at the City of Montreal. No one gets thrown in prison, not yet.
Let me ask another question. I find this really interesting in Monsieur Bergeron's campaign, and he said this many times as well. He talks about, and he didn't talk about it tonight, which I found interesting, about the tram. He didn't spend much time talking about that at all. I think he gets it. That doesn't resonate with potential voters. But what he did say, and I don't understand how this would work, he said, you know, we've been ripped off to the tune of $100 million a year, every year for the last 10 years. That's $1 billion. He says, we're going to get that money back, and we'll use that money to finance projects that I have in mind. Where are we getting, who's giving that money back exactly?
I don't think that'll happen. I think they're gone with it. And so you can't make a budget on the savings of previous years. I mean, that money is gone, and I don't think we'll ever see the light of it. But on the other hand, I mean, obviously budgets are going to be very important, but I don't believe when they say, for example, we're going to have a new deal with the government of Quebec, when we know that the government of Quebec is probably going to be $2 billion in the red this year, I don't believe they'll have any money to give back to the city. And on that front, I think we're going to be so tight that any promises with new monies or what have you, I don't believe it for a minute. I think we've got to be really, you know, tightening our belts. We won't have any choice.
But that's where we were seeing that Mr. Côté was very, very pragmatic. I mean, he was very much saying, you know, all the things that Madame Joly was saying were going to happen were not practical. And yet it's not, nobody wants to hear that their taxes aren't going to go down and that there's no money for big projects, but that's a fact. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the audience here, maybe you can let me know by virtue of your applause, when Mélanie Joly said, you know how much we pay in property tax here? 70-some-odd%. Do you know what they pay in Toronto? I think half the room went, couldn't believe that that's in fact how high our property taxes are here. And whether you can go ahead and effect change that quickly or not, I think that message resonates with people. We're taxed too much, we know it, and we want someone to go in and champion that cause and at least make an effort to change it.
We did have a champion. We did have a champion once upon a time, and that was supposed to be Gerald Tremblay, because actually they've lowered the 70%. It was actually even higher. It was closer to 80%. It's not how high your taxes are. It's the proportion of the revenue that comes from property tax. And they were supposed to fix that. That obviously hasn't happened, and it is contingent upon the Quebec government. And as Mr. Lapierre says, it's just not in the cards, and I don't think it's for a mayoral candidate to make a promise on behalf of the Quebec government.
But it's interesting that people that it resonates, that message does so well with everybody in the audience, whether it's practical or not.
But
it's interesting to know that she brought that up because she knew that would play.
But it's easy to bring up things that you know people are going to want to hear, but if they're not practical, then why?
All right, well, let's talk about how practical some things are. How practical is this idea? Because, again, I think this played very well to the room. as the new mayor, going to Quebec City and saying, hey, we're not going to be pushed around anymore. This idea that cities are going to become, as was stated during the debate, cities are going to become the big thing. 70 to 80% of the world's population will live in cities. Montreal deserves to run its own future. Do you think someone can go to Quebec City and push that agenda?
They don't have to go to Quebec City, they just have to run the things here. The thing is that we've had a vacuum over the last few years, and you had guys like Jean-François Lisée thinking that they were running the city. That is unacceptable. In my opinion, the next mayor of Montreal can't take it anymore. And so I think the legitimacy of the next mayor of Montreal is going to be on November 3rd, and after that day, I hope the mayor of Montreal doesn't get pushed around, neither by Quebec City nor by Ottawa. I think he should stand on his 2 feet, and I think that's what this election is all about to start with.
But they're going to have to be...
Before you go on, please don't say Jean run for mayor. We've tried this before, it doesn't work. So, Linda?
I think the only way, and actually all 4 mayoral candidates have staked their credibility in the next mandate, if any one of them gets elected, or whichever one of them gets elected, on cleaning up corruption. And I think on that point, all 4 of them were pretty weak tonight. I didn't hear one of them talk about deterrence. How do you prevent, it's not just preventing corruption, well, it is preventing corruption, but how do you prevent corruption? You deter people from engaging in the first place. They all talked about, for example, Mr. Bergeron talked about his team being honest, but what about the civil servants and the contractors? You know, no one has gone to jail at this point in the city over corruption. I mean, there's some arrests, but not even the kind of massive arrests you've seen in Laval, and yet so much has come out of the Charbonneau Commission. So, you know, an Inspector General, Mr. Coderre, is staking his platform on corruption, on creating an Inspector General, but actually an Inspector General already exists at the city. He's called the Comptroller General, who already has the mandate to look over contracts. This is the person who was spying on the Auditor General's emails. So that hasn't worked. So, I mean, there are little problems in all of their platforms or in all of their speeches about corruption, and yet each one of them tonight has staked their entire reputation on it.
I want to talk about something else, again, that resonates well in this room, and that was the language issue, which came up at some point. We know about Louise Arel, we know about the situation. I thought it was interesting that Marcel Côté tried to defend his view by sort of pushing Louise Arel off to the side and saying that, well, it doesn't really matter, here's what my opinion is, here's what my platform says. Can that work? How important is she to his campaign?
Well, frankly, I think he's stuck because she said it and he couldn't really say the opposite, but it doesn't make sense anyhow. Whether City Hall has enough on their plate right now to do a job, and I think, you know, they should take stands if the government of Quebec tries to do something more, like they are taking a stand on the charter. I think that's the role of the mayor of Montreal, but they should not try to do what the province is doing in its place. And so I don't think they should have anybody responsible for language on the executive committee. Let the province do that, but if something wrong is happening from the province, then take a stand.
Peggy?
I thought that he's in a tough position because basically she's half his team.
Yeah.
And so he can't really say anything else. It's out there. I thought he handled it as well as he possibly could. I thought it was very interesting that Mr. Bergeron said there's no problem and the whole room exploded. So clearly there are problems that still exist and people are pretending that they don't exist.
I agree with Peggy. I mean, he didn't have a choice. He can't backpedal or back away from it. It's been staked. We probably can figure out why. They've got their interest to protect the seats that they do have. That's Vision Montreal in the East End. In the West End, obviously, it doesn't play well. And I think you can waste your time creating a position, one position for the English on the executive committee, one position for the French.
Yeah, that didn't seem to make a lot of sense, did it?
But who is going to be in charge of corruption? We're going to have one person, if Mr. Coderre is elected, in charge of finance. In my mind, they should all be in charge of finance. I mean, that's one of the major things that they're managing on the executive committee.
Maybe what he meant was one person in charge of English corruption, one person in charge of French corruption. Maybe that's the dividing line, I think. Another subject that came up, and I don't think we got a real good answer from any of the candidates, was about this idea of special status for Montreal or free trade zone, whatever you want to call it. They all seem to back away from that idea.
Because they don't think it's realistic. I think Montreal has already a special status in itself, but trying to beg a special status from the province or from Ottawa frankly, I don't know where it'll get us. I think, you know, if we want to establish special programs or what have we do it. But why do we want to be called special status if it doesn't have any meaning? Put the substance, and that then you don't need the title. I mean, if you have special requirements, do ask for them. But if you call for special status, obviously the rest of the province will say no. It's like when we asked for distinct society, people said, oh, why would they be so distinct? And we got a pretty negative reaction, remember? And so I think begging for special status, be special. Don't beg for it.
But now, wait a sec. Let's bring something up, and that's the fact that Montreal generates whatever that percentage is of GDP for this entire province. Yeah. Does it deserve, based on that, special status as a free trade zone, for example?
That you could get. You don't have to ask for special status. If you want to get a free trade zone, you could get it. But don't say special status, because then obviously people go crazy.
I think you said, Peggy, at the outset, you didn't think Mélanie Joly did all that well tonight. Is that right?
I thought that she was weak, that she had a lot of platitudes, that she didn't seem to be able to answer questions about the economy. I think that's why Mr. Côté went after her when he asked her, okay, you've been doing this job as a PR person, what makes you qualified? And I don't think she answered a lot of questions. I think she comes across very nicely, but I don't think she's got the chops. And I felt tonight was the first time I really saw that she didn't have them.
I'm curious, if I could, just from the people here in the audience, how many of you agree with Peggy that she didn't come across that well? And how many of you think that she came across extremely well? Okay, I think they're with you. A couple of other issues. First of all, I'm not sure how this is going to play out at the end of the day. I got the impression, and I thought it was actually sort of rude, but maybe that's just me, watching when Mélanie Joly was speaking, Marcel Côté and Denis Coderre just sort of exchanging, you know, conversation in the middle of her speaking. Should I take anything from that? Do you think they're writing her off already as not being a serious contender?
I think they're worried that she is one.
Nobody knows how polls are going to translate in the ballot box. Frankly, you know, with last election, 39% of people going to vote, and usually there are two types of persons that go to vote in Montreal. It's older and homeowners. The others don't bother, so a call for the young generation is always very nice, but they never get to the ballot boxes. So if I were them, I wouldn't be worried on that extent, because there's a big difference between polls and what gets in the ballot box. The other aspect is organization. And you know, she started so late. I don't think she's got the troops to get the people out, because doing the tracking and what have you, this is basic in municipal politics.
I thought it was interesting that no one asked her, none of the other candidates asked her why she's only running 50-something candidates as opposed to running a full slate. I mean, how do you propose to become well, you could maybe get elected mayor of Montreal, but you're certainly not going to have a majority or anywhere close to it. So how do you propose to, how can you say you've assembled the best team when you've left half the seats empty?
Yet no one thought to ask that question.
Yep.
I want to go to Dan Delmar. We've been monitoring this on Twitter, and apparently it's the biggest trending topic right now, not only here in the city, but apparently across the country. Where's Dan? Dan, tell us a little bit about what's going on in social media on this.
Indeed, it did trend across Canada for a time this evening, and lots of talk on social media in terms of who won, who lost. I would say it's a reflection of who the candidate or the young base of these candidates. So Richard Bergeron, Mélanie Joly, I think won the debate on Twitter at least tonight, which is note because especially Collège de Montréal, they have a pretty large PR machine on Twitter. Mélanie Joly, of course, attracting a lot of young people as well. Marcel Côté was also pretty popular on Twitter, especially among Anglos. I think if there was one pro-Anglo candidate, let's just call it that, who won the night on Twitter, it would be probably Marcel Côté, I would imagine.
All right, that's interesting. Thank you, Dan. Peter Trent is here, the mayor of Westmount. You know, we want to talk about something. Well, the one thing we talked about today was about this pension problem, which never even came up tonight.
No,
it's a huge problem. It only involves about $500 million. But with respect to something, and I guess it was Mr. Coderre who said it, although maybe it was Mr. Côté, I'm trying to remember now, but reaching out about, you know, finally saying, okay, the city of Montreal is the city of Montreal, but we're not going to ignore all the other boroughs around this city. What did you think of that?
I think it was genuine. Certainly in the last 4 years, we've seen a sea change in that regard with Montreal. So we actually get along quite well with Montreal. What I noticed from this particular bunch was a violent agreement on most things. I found most people were pretty much the same. In fact, this was like a chacun de famille. You know, I mean, these people all know it seemed to like each other, the four people in front of us. And I found that they actually were all trying to say, well, I'm a little different. But in fact, they actually got along quite well. But they are trying to play the card of change. But that's the only card they can possibly play, because only one of them has any municipal experience. Now, I have to work with one of these four people, so I have to be careful what I say.
Who did you think was the most effective one here tonight?
This is why I'm not going to answer that question.
I think you can. They're not in the room.
But can I just give one bit of advice to the people in this room? When you decide to vote on the 3rd of November, I think the best thing you have to keep in mind is which of those four people will stand up to Quebec. That's what counts. Whether it's the pension fund or funding for mass transit or the TVQ credit, the credit on the sales tax, whether it's the fact that municipal employees make 33.6% more than the rest of the public sector, or whether it's a question of urban sprawl, all these issues are controlled by Quebec. So you can say all you want in front of these people, but unless this person whom you elect mayor can stand up to Quebec, this is all just blowing bubbles.
Right on.
Well, now we've actually addressed this. You said, I think we all share the same opinion. You share the opinion that it's, as Mr. Trent said, it's all well and good to talk about standing up to them. How realistic is that?
Well, it all depends on the credibility you have. Obviously, the results of the election are going to make a difference, and then how they keep public support. Because there's one thing getting elected, but after that, how they get people involved in municipal politics and in supporting their projects. Because obviously, if you want to go to Quebec City, they'll know whether or not you're speaking for yourself or you have public support. And the new mayor's got to be able to get wide support, and hopefully even those four people will be able to continue working together for the best interests of Montreal. But the leader that is going to get elected will need to really be almost non-partisan in a way, be a Montrealer for all Montrealers in a way, because we need to rebuild that rapport de force, because right now it's non-existent. Even the contrary, they just walk on us.
We're going to wrap it up. We have about 2 minutes left to go. Mr. Trent, if you want to add anything else, you'd like to ask another question or make a comment.
One quick point. I think it was in most people's minds, and it's the sort of thing that nobody talks about. It's sort of the third rail of municipal politics, and that's a question of structure. What we have now is not a municipal council, it is a parliament. We have a speaker, we have three parties, and it's all a question of trying to score points as opposed to making the right decision. And fundamentally, we are in a service delivery business, Linda. We really are in the service. We may be a government, but we're also in a service delivery business. And you can't run a service delivery business using a parliament. Now, what happens when you have a parliament? You have to have opposition parties, but you also have to have an executive committee, because 64 people can't possibly make a decision together. Now, if you reduce it to 19, you don't need an executive committee, you don't need the political parties, and you can attract a much higher quality of candidate. Why? Because then you can make the real decisions. And that's, to me, until you get rid of the 64 people, I'm sorry, it'll be a talk shop for the next 4 years.
I'm not sure I agree on all those points, though, because you have to remember that there are a lot of small towns in Quebec, or small municipalities, including along the North Shore, where there were also arrests, that have an executive committee, that have political parties. Most municipalities actually have political parties. I don't think the size necessarily begets that. And it's not one of the candidates, and this kind of ties into what you're saying, that not one of the candidates talked about, when they talk about revolution, they don't talk about public participation. Some of them talked about, I think Mélanie Joly talked about transparency, but it's not just because you have people who are allowed to look at the budget. They have to have a say in how that budget is.
But Linda, we heard about silos and we heard of transparency. I have a suggestion. Let's build transparent silos.
By the way, I kept score. The word transparency was mentioned more than any other word tonight.
And silos was the second.
Silos right behind it. Yeah,
Smart
for anyone
city.
who didn't know what silos were, I still don't know what they represent politically. but it seems to be the big buzzword for Denis Coderre, so I guess that's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our time. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much. The turnout was amazing. We thank you for your commitment and your involvement in politics as well. Linda Gyulai, Peggy, Curran, Jean Lapierre, on behalf of all of us, don't forget to go out and vote November 3rd.